All right, hi everyone. It's 3:10, so we will get started. Welcome back to Responsible Conduct of Research. Our topic today is the use of live vertebrate animals in research, and our speaker is Dr. Gina Dobeck. Dr. Dobeck is the director of Tulane's Department of Comparative Medicine. She oversees the laboratory animal care facilities on the uptown and the downtown campuses, and is the attending veterinarian for Tulane's Institutional Animal Care and Use program. She's responsible for veterinary and technical support of research at the university and for Tulane's compliance with animal welfare regulations, standards, and policies. She supervises the operations of 3 animal facilities and provides training, research guidance, and support to investigators. Dr. Dobeck holds a DVM degree from Texas A&M University. She completed her residency training in laboratory animal medicine at Tulane, and she is a diplomate of the American College of Laboratory Animal Medicine. We're so delighted that she's our speaker today. I ask that you please welcome her, and Dr. Dobeck, we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, everyone. So like Lisa said, for those of you who don't know about our department, we are responsible for the care of the research animals here at the downtown and uptown campuses. But another important role for our department is to help facilitate your research. So we do that through providing training. We help you schedule the transport of animals into and out of Tulane, and we provide veterinary consultation. So today I'll be speaking about the regulations and the ethics related to working with animals in research. So often when we're speaking with people outside the research fields, questions may come up like, why do we even have to use animals for research? Why can't we use techniques like computer simulation or cell culture instead? Another question that often comes up is, are the results that we obtain from animals really applicable to humans? So we'll talk about what we've learned so far from animal research, and I'll give a few examples of research fields where animal models continue to play a large role. Then we'll talk about the difference between animal rights and animal welfare and the groups that oppose animal research. Another important question that is brought up when discussing the ethics of animal research is, how are these animals protected? So we'll discuss the regulations and policies that are in place to protect animals that are used in research and teaching. And then we'll also talk about your role and responsibilities as researchers in complying with these regulations. So let's go back to that first question. Why do we need to use live animals for research? First, in order to develop treatments and cures for human diseases and injuries, we need to understand the basic physiology that we all share as vertebrate animals, as well as the pathophysiology of specific disease processes. Secondly, animals are necessary to provide an index of safety prior to work being conducted in humans. The Nuremberg Code was created in 1949 following the military tribunal trials of several German doctors who conducted unethical medical experiments on humans during World War II. So the Nuremberg Code outlines 10 basic principles that must be observed in human subjects research in order for it to be considered ethical. Some of these principles include the use of voluntary consent, avoiding injury and suffering, and that the researcher be qualified to perform the study. Principle 3 specifically addresses the importance of animal research, stating, the experiment should be so designed and based on the results of animal experimentation and a knowledge of the natural history of the disease or other problem under study. The Declaration of Helsinki was first adopted by the World Medical Association at their General Assembly in Helsinki, Finland in 1964. It's a statement of the ethical principles for medical research involving human subjects, and it expands on the principles that were originally outlined in the Nuremberg Code. And it too addresses the importance of preliminary animal research, stating medical research involving human subjects must conform to generally accepted scientific principles, be based on a thorough knowledge of the scientific literature, and adequate laboratory and animal experimentation. The third reason that we need to use live animals in research and teaching is because the body is made up of multiple cell, tissue, and organ types with complex interactions with each other. So these processes can only be fully studied in the whole living animal. Also, the use of animal models are important not only for research, but also to train the next generation of scientists, physicians, veterinarians, nurses, etc. One argument that's often made against the use of live animals in research is that we have alternative technologies, such as cell culture and computer simulations, to take their place. And these alternatives are a very important component of the research discovery process. You may use them in your own research. Unfortunately, these methods can only take us so far. For example, they make excellent preliminary screening tools for new drug treatments, but they can never replicate all of the complex processes that occur in a whole living organism. In addition, follow-up testing in animals is often required by law. You may be familiar with what is called the 2-animal rule. The FDA typically requires that a new drug or biological product be tested in more than one animal species before it can be tested or approved for human use. So while in vitro models are important, at this time they don't have the power to completely replace the use of animal models. They do have the power to reduce the number of animals that are required for research, which is definitely a good thing. Another question that's asked is, can the results that we obtain from animal research really be applied to humans? And the answer is yes. There are many similarities in our physiology and our behavior that we share with other animal species. Here's some examples listed of specific areas of study that are very similar between humans and the species listed. In addition, with the generation of transgenic rodents, even humanized rodents, we now have the power to create animals that model specific conditions in humans. Transgenic zebrafish have also recently been generated, and they're really taking off in popularity as an animal model for human diseases. The importance of these animal models is evident when you consider that nearly all medical advances were in some way shaped by animal research. Of the 216 recipients of the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine, 180 of those utilized animals in their research. This includes every prize awarded for the past 30 years, including this past year's prize awarded for the discovery of how cells in the body adapt to changing oxygen availability. And those 3 recipients used mice in their research. These next 3 slides show some of the most important scientific discoveries of the past century and the animal models that were utilized for those experiments. These include all of our vaccines for animals and humans, organ transplant procedures, imaging modalities such as CT, MRI, treatments for a wide host of diseases, including kidney disease, cancer, asthma, diabetes, Parkinson's disease, HIV, the list goes on and on. So I've presented a lot of historical data, but the research to understand the underlying mechanisms of disease and to find new and improved preventatives and treatments is still ongoing. So I'll go through a few examples. So one of those areas of research is autism. Autism, as you may know, is a challenging area of research because it's actually a spectrum of diseases that vary in presentation and severity. And we're just starting to understand that there are many genetic components as well as environmental factors that play a role. There are actually over 80 different genetically modified types of mice available for the study of autism alone. So in my opinion, the mouse is really the superhero of autism research. What's interesting about these mice is that they show many of the same behavioral characteristics of people with autism, such as disinterest in socialization, anxiety, and compulsive behaviors. Mice are very social animals. So when you introduce a mouse to a strange mouse, it will immediately go up and introduce itself and begin interacting with that mouse. A mouse with autism, however, does not show interest in unfamiliar mice. In this video, we'll see the mouse with autism on the left. The neurotypical mouse is on the right. Hit play. There we go. So you can see the mouse on the left is sitting in one spot and just grooming itself over and over. While the neurotypical mouse on the right, as soon as it sees that there's a strange mouse in the cage next door, it goes over and says, "Hey, who are you? What's going on?" But the mouse on the left really didn't pay any attention at all to the mouse on the right. Mice with autism will also spend an unusually large amount of time grooming, and they may exhibit signs of anxiety when faced with an unfamiliar situation, such as the marble test. That's an example of a test for anxiety in mice. So we all know that obesity has become a health epidemic in the Western world, and it's a major risk factor for a host of diseases. In the United States, 64% of adults and 1/3 of all children are overweight. In the Gulf South, our obesity rates are the highest in the country, consisting of about 33% of our population. We have several mouse and rat models available that allow us to study the development of obesity and the resulting health conditions. One of these is the Zucker obese rat. This rat has a mutation in the leptin receptor gene and is characterized by obesity, overeating, high triglycerides in the blood, and development of type 2 diabetes. Here's a picture of the lean control rat for comparison. A major focus of research here at Tulane is the pathogenesis of HIV and the development of AIDS. The disease first appeared in the early 1980s. A blood screening test was first developed in 1985 with chimpanzee research. In the late 80s and 90s, mice and rhesus monkeys were instrumental in the development of antiretroviral drugs. And the rhesus monkey is an excellent model of HIV and AIDS and is still being used in the search for a vaccine and improved therapeutics for the disease. So the great news is that with these advances in treatment, an HIV diagnosis is no longer a death sentence. So the number of HIV positive people who are surviving has risen dramatically, as you can see in this chart. Unfortunately, the number of new HIV infections has stayed the same for decades. And unfortunately, here in the South, we again have the distinction of being not only number one in obesity, but also in the number of HIV diagnoses. So there's a continued need for further research so that we can ultimately find a vaccine to prevent these new infections from occurring. So next, let's talk about the laws and regulations that are in place to protect research animals. One of those federal regulations is the Animal Welfare Act, which was first signed into law in 1966. It's enforced by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. It's been amended several times since it was first enacted to expand protection for research animals and other animals. In 1985, the Health Research Extension Act was passed. This is enforced by the NIH Office of Laboratory Animal Welfare, and it applies to all public health service funded research. Both the Animal Welfare Act and the PHS policy are broken down into sections that describe the requirements for adequate veterinary care, housing, feeding, handling, sanitation and ventilation, and monitoring of animals in research. Each institution is also required to have a documented and detailed emergency plan. And every proposed research study must undergo review and approval by an institutional animal care and use committee. And if any investigator is found to be non-compliant with the regulations, then Tulane is required to report that individual to the federal government and the funding agency. Because Tulane receives grant dollars from the federal government, we're required to file what's called an animal welfare assurance with the NIH. This is basically a contract that says in exchange for this funding, we're going to follow the law. This is how we're going to do it as it applies to the animals. The NIH is allowed to come out and inspect us at any time unannounced. Tulane is also a registered research facility with the USDA, and the USDA does come out every year unannounced to inspect us. We actually had a surprise virtual visit from our USDA inspector yesterday. So that was an interesting way to go about things in the time of coronavirus. Tulane is also accredited by a nonprofit organization called ALAC. This is a voluntary accreditation process that we go through, and it shows that Tulane is actually going above and beyond the minimum required by law. ALAC comes out to do a site visit every 3 years. Their standards are very high. They perform a very thorough review of every aspect of our animal care program, including the facilities where animals are housed or used, the IACUC and its processes, the veterinary care for the animals, and our occupational health program for personnel working with animals. So now that we've established that animal research is important and necessary, how can we ensure that it is being performed in an ethical manner? One of the guiding principles for conducting ethical animal research that's used all over the world is called the 3 R's. These stand for replacement of animals with either non-animal models or with less sentient animals. So instead of using a dog, if you can use a mouse, that's better. Instead of using a mouse, if you can use something like a Drosophila fly, that's even more ideal. The second R stands for refinement. We're always working to improve our protocols to reduce pain and distress to the animals. And then the third R stands for reduction. So we are trying to use the smallest possible number of animals that gives us statistically significant results. So all researchers have to address the 3 R's in their protocol that's reviewed by the Institutional Animal Care and Use Committee. So let's talk a little bit about the numbers of animals used in research and put those into perspective. So mice and rats are the powerhouses of research. They make up over 95% of the animals that are used in research. Of the remaining 5%, less than 0.5% is made up of cats, dogs, and non-human primates. And over the years, you can see that the number of cats, dogs, and non-human primates used in research has continued to fall, which is a good thing. You might be looking at the numbers on the left-hand axis and thinking, wow, how many animals are we talking about here? That's like a lot. So can anyone guess how many animals are used in research in the US each year? You can use the chat feature if you want. I'll pause momentarily if anyone wants to throw a guess out there. All right, people are being shy, but that's okay. If you guessed 26 million, then you're correct. So each of these mice icons represents 1 million animals that are studied and ultimately killed every year for research in the United States alone. So I don't think anyone here on this Zoom meeting is going to deny that that is a lot of animals. And that's why that R, a reduction, is so important. Our goal should always be working toward reducing that number by conducting sound science, avoiding unnecessary duplication of research, and strengthening those capabilities of our in vitro models. But let's go ahead and put that number into perspective. Can anyone guess how many chickens are killed each year for food in the United States? Oh, people were guessing. That's awesome. All right, someone guessed 1 billion. That's a pretty good guess. So each of these dots represents 1 million chickens. So I actually couldn't even get a chicken icon small enough to represent that many chickens. Every year in the United States alone, we consume over 9 billion chickens. So this graph shows the same numbers with additional uses of animals, such as pigs for food, animals that are killed by vehicles on the highways, even animals killed by hunting. So yes, we use a lot of animals for research, but that number is actually quite small when compared to the use of other animals. We really love our chicken in the United States. So the last topic we'll talk about today is animal welfare and the role that we all play in promoting animal welfare. Animal welfare is the concept that as humans, we have a moral obligation to provide for the well-being of animals. Since we use animals for food, companionship, entertainment, and research, then we have to make sure that these animals who provide for us are treated humanely. This is a different concept from animal rights, which is the viewpoint that all animals have the same rights as humans. People who believe in animal rights believe that we should not be allowed to own or use animals for any reason, including food, clothing, entertainment, or research. And some individuals take that belief so far that they believe that we don't even have the right to use animals as working animals like police or disaster recovery work, or even to own animals as pets. There are several organizations for people who identify with animal rights, the most famous of which is PETA, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals. I feel like I need a new picture. Justin Bieber doesn't look like that anymore. Look how cute he was when he was little. Animal rights organizations like PETA feel that all animal research is unnecessary and should be abolished. Their director and co-founder, Ingrid Newkirk, has been quoted as saying, "Even if animal research resulted in a cure for AIDS, we'd still be against it," amongst other inflammatory remarks that she's made, such as advocating the use of arson against research labs. Now, the majority of animal rights activists pursue their campaigns legally and peacefully through protests and advertising campaigns, and that is their legal right to do so. This is in contrast to animal rights extremist groups, which advocate violence and terrorism to achieve their goal. And the FBI does consider these groups to be domestic terrorist organizations. So examples of extremist groups include SHAC, Stop Huntington Animal Cruelty, and ALF, the Animal Liberation Front. The spokespersons for these groups have stated that they consider violence, including murder, to be necessary and justifiable when it comes to animal research and other uses of animals. The good news is in 2006, the Animal Enterprise Terrorism Act was passed, which expanded protection for academic and commercial institutions that use or sell animals. and increased existing penalties against animal rights extremist groups. And it has actually led to the successful conviction and imprisonment of several individuals who are targeting researchers. So as a research institution, how do we ensure that we are following the regulations and ensuring animal welfare? It's not just the responsibility of the Institutional Animal Care and Use Committee or the animal care staff taking care of the animals to make sure that we have a strong program of animal welfare. It really is a team approach that requires cooperation from researchers, the IACUC, the animal care staff, and the leadership at Tulane. The institutional leadership, and specifically the institutional official, plays an important role at each research institution. The IO is typically a high-ranking individual, often the CEO, president, or vice president of a company or a university. Our institutional official here at Tulane is the Vice President of Research, Dr. Giovanni Piedemonte. And their job is to provide leadership, disseminate the institutional policies, and basically set the standard for the research performed at the institution. They also have to have the power to allocate adequate resources to maintain quality animal care and a high level of research. They basically have to have some control of the purse strings. And they're also the one who appoints members to the IACUC, and they're also the ones that provide annual reports to the USDA and to the NIH, Office of Laboratory Animal Welfare. As I mentioned, each institution is required to have an Institutional Animal Care and Use Committee, or IACUC, as part of its animal care program. The IACUC is responsible for upholding the standards that are set forth in the regulations and the institutional policies. And no research using animals may proceed without approval by the IACUC. Each IACUC committee is required to include at least one scientist, non-scientist, veterinarian, and member of the public who is not affiliated with the institution. When reviewing the IACUC protocol, the committee is looking for justification for the use of the animals. They're looking to see that the individuals involved are adequately trained and experienced, that the investigator has considered alternatives to the use of animals and alternatives to the use of painful or distressful research techniques, and how that pain and distress will be alleviated. In addition to reviewing proposed use of animals on campus, the IACUC is the one that reviews the entire animal care program twice a year. They also inspect every room on campus where animals are used or housed. That's done every 6 months. The IACUC is the ones that investigate any concerns that are brought to them regarding the use of animals on campus. And in the event that an investigator is found to be non-compliant with the regulations or with their IACUC protocol, then the IACUC has the power to suspend that investigator's research and report them to the federal government and their funding agencies. The next member of the team is the animal care staff. So that includes the veterinarians like myself, veterinary technicians, animal care technicians, and a host of other individuals who help keep the animals happy and healthy and the animal facility running smoothly. Each institution is required by law to have an attending veterinarian who is a member of the IACUC and is responsible for the care and health of the animals. In addition to clinical duties, the attending veterinarian is responsible for the management of the animal facility and provides training and technical assistance to anyone that works with the animals. The attending veterinarian also has the power to halt any activity if they feel that the animal's welfare is at risk or if the work is not being performed in compliance with the IACUC protocol. And the attending veterinarian also has the responsibility to report any animal concerns or noncompliance to the IACUC. The animal care staff is responsible for the daily husbandry, the enrichment and socialization of the animals, as well as the maintenance of the facility. And the animal care staff are really on the front line when it comes to animal welfare. The majority of the non-compliance concerns that are reported to the IACUC are first reported by the animal care staff. They're the ones that are looking at the animals every day, and so they're often the first to know when something looks unusual or if the animal is unwell. Our animal care staff at Tulane cares for the animals 7 days a week, 365 days a year. That includes weekends, holidays, emergency closures, the string of hurricanes that we've had recently. Our animal care staff ride-out team has stayed in the facility with the animals overnight. And there's also always a veterinarian on call during weekends, holidays, and emergency closures. So finally, what are your responsibilities as researchers in maintaining the welfare of the animals you work with? So first, you have to obtain IACUC approval prior to beginning any research or teaching activity with animals. You have to obtain your animals through approved means. So that's typically through our office, and we assist you with that process. The only difference might be if you're working out in the field with wild animals. So we don't handle the wild animals. And you cannot make any changes to your experiments until you have submitted an amendment to your IACUC protocol and had those changes approved by the IACUC. In addition, it is your responsibility to cooperate with the IACUC and provide any information that they request related to the animals. As I mentioned earlier, the IACUC does have the power to suspend an investigator's research if they feel that serious or continuing noncompliance is occurring that threatens the welfare of the animals. And investigators are required by law to comply with that suspension. It's also very important that you do not allow your IACUC protocol to expire if you have animals on that protocol in the animal facility. The federal government does not allow animal research to be performed on an expired protocol. And the NIH and other funding agencies will also not allow their funds to be used to pay for animals on an expired protocol. We actually had an instance a few years ago where an investigator let their protocol expire over several months, and that individual was required by the NIH to find an alternate means to pay for the per diem costs of their animals during that time because the NIH would not allow the grant to cover those costs. The PI is also responsible for their staff and students who are working with the animals. They must ensure that all personnel who have contact with live animals are added to their IACUC protocol and that they've been appropriately trained for their role. Investigators are also responsible for the animal records that document any procedures that are performed on the animals. And those records should be up to date and complete and available for inspection at any time. I mentioned our IACUC comes by and inspects every 6 months. And we also have these surprise visits from the regulatory bodies. They almost always want to go to a laboratory of their choosing and look at a student's laboratory notebook where animal procedures have been documented. And the PI is also responsible for the safety of their personnel who are working with the animals, including making sure they've been enrolled in the Tulane Occupational Health Program. And investigators have a responsibility to report any concerns they may have regarding animals on campus. So if any of you ever have a concern about animal health or welfare, please contact any of these individuals, including myself and Mr. Brian Weimer, who's on the meeting. We have the contact information for these individuals posted at the entrance to all of our animal facilities. You can also find our contact information on the Office of Research Compliance website. Your identity can remain anonymous, and if you wish, and if you are a Tulane employee, your job is also protected. Here's the contact information for Brian's office. And Tulane also has this new third-party, completely anonymous compliance hotline. that you can either call or go online to make any reports. And so my hope is that everyone leaves this Zoom meeting today realizing just how valued these research animals are. Biomedical researchers understand that happy, healthy animals make the best research subjects and therefore produce the best data. And my staff come to work every day because we love animals and they're important to us as well. All right, does anyone have any questions? You can use the chat feature. Happy to answer any questions you might have.
Hey, Gina, it's Brian. I have an observation, if I could start things off maybe. When you were talking about, if the protocol's expired, that the grant can't be billed for the cost of the animals. And we see something similar actually when we have non-compliance and there's grant funding for the animal research. So we can't bill the grant for any non-compliant activities. So, for example, any of the research done that's not in accordance with the ICOOC approved protocol. So those costs, which include the animal costs, salary support, et cetera, can't be billed to the grant. And it creates budgetary issues. So I wanted to point that out as well.
A good point. Thanks, Brian.
Hi, Georgina. Thank you so much for your presentation. I had one serious and one not serious question. My serious question is, as researchers, a lot of time we're having to come up with new protocols to test new ideas. And I wanted to know if the Department of Comparative Medicine are ever involved in that type of experimental planning, or just are researchers to bring you the protocol to be checked for safety?
Absolutely. So I can assist researchers with planning their experiments, coming up with the best analgesic plans for surgery, for example, helping them identify the best model for their research. And I can definitely help with the ICOOC protocol process as well. So I have administrative privileges in ResearchWave, so I can see any drafts that you're working on. So I'm always happy if you just want to send me an email or give me a phone call to take a look at your draft and answer any questions you have. And I can also do a pre-review of your protocol before you submit it to the IACOOC. We can work out any issues before it goes for review.
And that's for regardless of if you're uptown or downtown?
That's correct.
Okay. And then my not serious question is, I also believe that the animals are like superheroes, and I love that poster that you guys have downtown. And I was wondering if we could get those to post in our labs, or how we can get access to those.
Absolutely. I think we have a few on hand. If you send me an email, we'll be happy to give you the source of those posters. They're really cute. Any other questions?
Regina? Hey, that was very nice talk. So I have a question on the autism mouse. Is that an inbred mouse strain with a genetic change, or is that an induced condition?
Yes, so those models are genetic, transgenic mice.
Okay, interesting. Thank you.
Hi, Dr. Dobek. I was curious if you think that scientific literacy has a role to play in pushback against animal use in research. And is it the responsibility of researchers in the scientific community to communicate research more transparently to dispel these sort of opinions?
That is a great question, Parker. I mean, scientific literacy does play a role. I think, unfortunately, there's maybe a whole atmosphere of distrust of science that's come up in recent years. So if you were to ask a member of the public 100 years ago what they thought about science and scientists were considered the superheroes. They were up there with the most trusted people in society, and people loved science. These were people that you looked up to and wanted to grow up to be. Now I think that's not quite so much the case, especially for animal researchers. So I think we do have an important role to play as scientists to tell people what we do. I think for a long time, animal researchers especially were very closed off about what they did. They didn't want to talk about it. Whereas animal rights organizations very successfully were making these very public campaigns to promote their agendas. So I think it's important that we do talk about what we do. We talk about our science and how important it is for society and for human and animal health. And that we talk about how much we like the animals. We enjoy working with them. The animals are well cared for. They receive the best care possible. And happy, healthy animals make the best research subjects. So we want to keep it that way. And it doesn't have to mean that you have to go out and give presentations or go speak to high school classes if that's not your thing. It's as simple as talking to your family and friends and neighbors. And when they ask you what you do, be excited about it, be positive about it. And oftentimes when I've done that as well, I find that people come back and say, wow, I had no idea that the animals were so well cared for or that there were so many regulations in place to protect them. And it makes them feel good too. So yeah, I think we do have an important role to play.
Thank you.
Any other questions? These have been great questions. Y'all are a great audience. Okay, well, thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dobeck. We really, really appreciate your great presentation today. And one last call for questions before we sign off for today. Going once, going twice. Okay, well, thank you again, Dr. Dobeck, and we will see everyone next week, same time, same place. Take care, everybody.